Good morning, everyone. Maribel Cifuentes, buenos días a todos. Muchísimas gracias a todas las personas que están aquí, que hablan español, que nos acompañaron para esta conferencia. Muchas gracias, estoy feliz de verlos a todos. I'm so happy that you are all here. Special shout out to those of you who speak Spanish who joined us at this conference, and to the amazing team of CLC who provided interpretation for us. Shout out to them. Well, I am so excited this morning because I get to have what I think will be a really, really wonderful closing conversation with three amazing people that I got to know a little bit better here at the symposium. So I'm just so pleased to be joined today by Lorez Meinhold, by Yessica Holguin, and Matt Karkut. And we are actually, rather than me telling you about them, we are going to start by asking them to just tell you a little bit about themselves and sort of, who they are, what they do, what's their story at a personal level, and also what called them to this work. So we're gonna go ahead and start with that, if that's okay. We'll start with Lorez.
Great. Thank you. Such an honor to be with all of you here today. My name is Lorez Meinhold. I'm the director of Caring for Denver Foundation. I have a challenge keeping a job. So I have been in the nonprofit sector for a very long time. So I have started a foundation, had the great opportunity to work with the Health Foundation, as well as serve under two governors, worked for the Medicaid agency as a deputy director, and then did some nonprofit consulting. And all of that led me to where I am today, which is leveraging all of those skills and opportunities to create a change in mental health and substance misuse. So Caring for Denver was created out of a ballot initiative in 2018. It raised sales tax by 0.25% to fund and improve mental health and substance misuse in the city and county of Denver. And we've had this great opportunity over this last 3 years to give away $82 million to over 200 organizations. And many are in this room, so I'm super excited. And then what I would say, what brought me to this work, what has been consistent through everything that I've done is creating change, is disrupting. That we really need to center everything we do around people and people's needs, and how do we do that? And how do we really step into that place and make sure that we create systems, organizations that work better for people, because that's ultimately what it's all about. And I really say that it's working with people to create systems that work for them, not doing it to people. And so that's super important, no matter what sector you're in, is how do you center everything around the voice of community. So thank you.
Yessica?
Thank you. Muy buenos días. Good morning, everyone. I'm Yessica Holguin. I'm the Executive Director of Center for Community Wealth Building. And as I think about systems, I think I've always been a disruptor. I was trying to think back of the first time that I disrupted a system. And I think it was when I was 5 years old, and I was asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I wanted to become a priest. And the nun said, oh, sweetie, you can't become a priest. I was like, why not? My mom said I can be anything I want to be. And she said, no, but you can be a nun. And I was like, you have no power. Nobody listens to you. It was not a good day in my family, my Catholic family. But it was in that moment that I realized that the priest had a lot of power. Every Sunday, he had a captive audience that would listen. And I recognized that at a very young age. Now, fast forward, I ended up, I was the first one in my family to go to college. I ended up running away from domestic violence. And so it truly is the lived experience that has truly driven this passion to be here. Having had such a difficult time navigating the college environment and scholarships, I grew up in a very low-income family, and so the thought of even having to pay for college was so overwhelming that at one point I was like, what do other students like me do? So I ended up doing a lot of work because I felt like if I can break the cycle of poverty through education, that's how we can actually get more opportunities in my community, in our communities. And so I dedicated the first 12 years of my life to developing programs for students who looked like me, who had ambition and a lot of drive, but didn't necessarily have the resources. My parents didn't go to college, so all of that was completely new to them. And in 2011, my partner and I decided to quit our dream jobs and join the Peace Corps. Everyone in the world, or a lot of people thought we were out of our minds. Why? You made it. Why would you go back into poverty? And to me, it was a privilege to be able to say, I can go and I can support others. You see, I thought I was going to be helping people. Little did I know that I would be helped so much more. And so everything that I've done is truly to challenge the system and to look at ways in which we can ensure that our economic opportunities can be at the core of what we do. And so ended up coming back in 2017, and I took on this amazing job that would provide the opportunity to study what it would take to build community wealth. And then at a month 2, I realized we don't have a year to study this problem. Things are moving very quickly. And so it truly is my lived experience, my personal connection to my communities, having grown up in a low-income community and in the most polluted zip code in the nation, that has driven everything that I do to continue to advance economic opportunities for others. And I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you, Yessica. Matt, tell us about you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Buenos días a todos. Bon dia. Algunos brasileiros aqui. Bonjour à tous les francophones. Les gens du Sénégal, je vous ai écouté. My name is Matt, and I'm going to answer the question that I know you're all wondering. No, I did not get lost on the way to senior prom or a wedding or something. I'm wearing the suit because I'm from the western part of Colorado. Anybody else here from the western slope? And western slope people, do we dress up? You're right, it's a trick question, we don't. It's like you go to somebody's wedding, you look to your left, somebody's wearing sweaty gym shorts. You look to the right, somebody's wearing a bike helmet. It's like you feel like you're inside an REI outlet catalog or something. So when I got the opportunity to come here and talk, I was so happy because I knew it would be the one time in 4 years that I've ever been able to wear a suit for something for work. But there's more to me than just making weird jokes about suits on stage, you know? For work, for example, I have the privilege of working at an amazing organization in Durango, Colorado, an immigrant resource center. It's called Compañeros, and it's a one-stop shop for any and all type of service that our immigrant community could want. Helping with driver's licenses, with COVID vaccines, this year with helping a trailer park, helping the residents and supporting them in forming a legal cooperative, getting financing to buy that trailer park to keep themselves from being evicted and take ownership of where they live. I'm a bit of a new person to the nonprofit sector. I hear people up here talking about being in this sector for 20-something years or something. I've been in it for 4 years, and I think I still have a bit of an outsider's perspective. I'm also on the board of the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition and the Chinook Fund, based in Denver, a social justice change-making organization. But I have a different perspective on how this sector works, and I think being an ED and working in a rural part of the state for a community that's often overlooked, my perspective on how this works and how this whole world that we live in the nonprofit and philanthropic sector, it's definitely a strange world. And I hope today to share some insights with you and ideas about how we can move forward and change the status quo.
Yes.
There, I said it. It's like when you're watching the movie and you're waiting for them to say the title of the movie in the movie. But a bit about me, I'm originally from Salt Lake City, Utah. I grew up there. My mom is an adoptee from South Korea. She was born in Seoul in the years following the Korean War. My father is from New York, and I went to Pomona College. I studied politics, philosophy, economics. And really what drove me to go into work like this was same thing, kind of like Lorez. I had trouble holding down a job, and for my several years after college, I dabbled in everything from English teaching as a second language in foreign countries, trip guiding for trips of teenagers in Latin American countries, interpretation and translation. I was interpreter / Uber driver for refugees in Salt Lake City. I drive Cubans to the doctor, hang out, chat, talk about all sorts of things. And I really kind of came to Durango by chance with my girlfriend Cassandra, who you may have seen dancing last night a little bit. She was the one Karen was talking about. But I started volunteering at the organization where I now work and helping with all the intakes, all the forms, all the papers, everything from scratch, doing all the services. And a couple months in, the director said, hey, I'm thinking of moving on, and would you like to maybe have my job? And I said, well, okay. And I've been there ever since, and through these years, I've been really lucky to get to know a lot of people in this room and have the support of so many people I see, from the Colorado Health Foundation to the Latino Community Foundation of Colorado to the Rocky Mountain Health Foundation. I've seen a lot of you and others here, and in the last 4 years, we've been able to grow this organization from a one-person thing, with me running around with like so many hats on my head that I couldn't keep them on, to a team of 3 full-time staff, to having 2 or 3 other part-time AmeriCorps interns per year, to do all these great things and to try to make an impact on our community. So, glad to be here.
Thanks so much, Matt. Thank you all for being here with us today. So now that you know them a little bit better, you will understand why we invited them for this last part of the conversation. So over the 3 days, right, we've talked about changing the system at different levels. Day 1, really very much at an individual level, human system. We talked about community systems in day 2, and then today, these amazing panelists are gonna talk about sort of that macro level, right? Big systems change. And they're gonna talk about it from these very rich perspective that they just shared with you. So as we think about what does it mean to disrupt, dismantle, and replace, right? Big systems. In order to really change the status quo, we understand that, first of all, it's a game, and we need to both understand the rules, and then we have to be able to change the rules, right? To create that equitable future that we all want to see. So the first question that I want everybody to speak to is, what does that mean to you when you think about changing the status quo and changing the rules of the game? What do you think about?
I will jump right in. What I would say is currently the status quo is really grounded in maintaining the power imbalances that exist in our society. And to change that means that we all have to use our powers and our resources to move the needle, to create the change we want. And whether that's systemically, organizationally, or individually, we all have power. And what I will say is the status quo wants you not to believe that, wants to undermine that. And our power exists in both our words and our actions, our voice and our actions. And so it's on us to use our power and resources to fight the fight. And what I'll say is, as a foundation, especially with a foundation with privilege, that is our role and responsibility, as well as everybody in the room.
Thank you. So for me, I'm committed to changing our economic system. For us, for our communities, it has been way too long. You know, some people say, well, the system is just not working. But I correct them because the system is working exactly as it was designed to work. It's about extractive economics. It is about taking advantage of our labor. It is about building our economy on the backs of Black and brown people. People of color have built this country, and yet we continue to be impacted by economic conditions. You know, some people said, you know, our economy is doing great. Now for our communities. Our communities continue to struggle to this day, and we need to do something about it. This system is not doing good. This system is actually, it's not just impacting people of color. At the end of the day, this is a race to the bottom that's gonna impact every single one of you and every single one of us. And so we need to make sure that we're disrupting this system, because at the end of the day, we're all gonna be impacted. So the way that we do that is through 3 basic strategies. One is democratizing ownership. We truly believe that those who are actually creating the profit should be the ones to benefit from it. That's supposed to be radical. I don't know why. This is about creating an economy that works for all. And so we truly believe that when people actually have the ownership, that they can make the best decisions for themselves. We truly believe in strengthening opportunities for people of color, especially entrepreneurship opportunities. And so we work with small businesses to help them connect to new markets. And we do it through our third strategy, which is engaging anchor institutions. We truly believe that the power of these place-based institutions, if you think about hospitals, universities, municipalities, our school districts, they're getting our tax dollars. And they're supposed to have a social mission to support our communities. And so what if, I know I'm being radical here, but what if we were to actually align the business practices with the mission that we want to see? It's really not that radical at all, right? But what if we were to actually create opportunities for people to actually do business with these entities? Just imagine for a second, even if we're looking at janitorial services, wouldn't it be better for this contract to go to the locally owned, worker-owned cooperative so that those profits can stay in their own community? Because what happens right now is that all of these RFPs look very beautiful and there's a whole process behind them. It is out-of-state corporations that end up getting these contracts, and what do? They come and they hire our people for minimum wage. When this is our tax dollars that are supposed to be at work for our people. What if we were to all come together and say, this is not okay, and this is no longer enough? And so I am here to invite you all, because at the end of the day, the work that we're doing is gonna require every single one of you to ask the question, why is it being done this way? And is there a better way to do it? At the end of the day, it's gonna fall on every single one of us to make sure that we're making change happen. Because let me tell you something, power concedes nothing without a struggle. And unless we're willing to stand up and say, this is no longer enough, this is no longer good enough for our communities, we're gonna continue to be here 10, 20, 30 years from now. I also wanna share that this economy was built intentionally through extractive practices. And there are policies that actually help create the middle class that intentionally excluded people of color. And so when people tell me, but why do you focus on people of color? It is because if we can actually focus on those who have been most vulnerable, we can actually make change happen for everybody. When we're lowering the barriers of opportunity, we can actually make it happen. So I am so glad you're here today so that we can actually take this on and actually create an economy that works for all. Thank you.
When I think about changing the status quo and making something that works for everyone, that works for all of us, I think about it within the nonprofit sector, within the philanthropic sector. Because as it currently stands, there are lots of rules and practices, lots of ways of doing things, a status quo, so to speak, of how we make funding available or how we restrict it, of how we receive funding, how we're allowed to spend it, how we're not, how we're allowed to treat our employees, how much we're allowed to pay them. There's all these things that influence each one of our jobs, probably. Most of us in this room, or many of us, work in nonprofits, we work in philanthropy, and we're subject to all of these rules. The result of them is that we have certain types of people who can succeed in this type of sector, who can be predisposed to success in the realm of grant writing, in the realm of running organizations, all the loops and hoops that you have to jump through to be successful. And then you have people who are at a disadvantage because of how the system is made. I believe that with all these, everything we're working on, all these causes, all these issues in our state, in our country, in our communities that we're working on, it's a thing that I think our sector and our world is waking up to, that the people most closely associated with those issues, the ones with lived experience, the ones who know what it's about, are the best ones to be able to find solutions to them. But our sector right now, it doesn't enable the leadership of everyone. It enables the leadership and the success of people who are able to go through the rules of the nonprofit sector. And until we change those rules, until we change the way that funding is made and how we change the rules and how it's be able to be used, we're going to be stuck with it how it is now. I really like music. I really love hip hop. There's an old refrain in a lot of stuff. The best rapper out there is probably somewhere stacking produce. The idea is that people have talent, people have dreams, people have ambition and skill, but many times the systems that they operate within don't allow them to actually have success. They don't allow them to have the luck or the resources or the access to the power that they need to realize what they have in their heart, in their mind, whether it's a song, whether it's an album, or whether it's a community center or a program. I want to talk today in this talk about real tangible things that we can do to change those things. And as Yessica said, it comes down to us. We have power. We can advocate for these changes. all of the funders in this room, you can make these changes. You can change the way you fund and support organizations. And all the organizations in this room too, you can push back and you can ask for these changes. I think we have this power dynamic where we feel we can't raise our voice sometimes because we don't want to get the rug pulled out from under us. And I think a lot of us have probably had that experience before, where for some arbitrary reason we were denied funding or cut off from something. It could have been that a funding priority of your funder changed, or that they met one of your board members and didn't like them. It could be that they didn't like your joke about suits because they work at a tailor or something. You know? You never know. But until we change those rules, we'll be having the status quo as it is. But the exciting thing is we can change it, and it's up to us. And I believe we're making progress.
Thank you all. So I forgot to say that, of course, every one of you is going to get the opportunity to also ask questions from the panelists. So each of you has cards on your table, and they'll be passed out. Be thinking about what your questions are, write them down, they'll be collected, and they'll come up to the stage when we get to the Q&A session. But piggybacking on all the thoughts and ideas that you've put out there, you know, this idea of connection and relationship, right, is so important. You talked about it, Matt. I think all of you talked about it in one way or another. So I love, you know, this is also hard work that takes a long time. So this, you know, the beautiful African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, right, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. So thinking about that, what do you think about the role of connection and relationships as a key tool to really create those systemic changes and those systemic solutions that we're all looking for? We'll start with Matt, and we'll go this way.
Okay. I think something very important is the connection with the community. I think something very important is the connection between the funder and the community, or the funder and the organization doing the work. I think that in this sector, too often we have a relationship of unequal power. We have a relationship of the funder paternalistically determining the priorities, telling the organization what to do, how to do it, what money can be spent on, what it can't be spent on. And we also have it for a short-term thing. It's not a long-term relationship many times. It's something where you get a grant for a year, and they say, well, here it's for a year, and then after that, well, talk to us again, maybe we'll do it, maybe not. I think relationships, in the way I see them in our sector, and something that I want to see change, is that commitment between funders and organizations. I want to see partnership more than just this power dynamic of asking for the money and then getting it and having all these rules. I want to see working together, talking about how we can look at an issue from the same side of the table and find a solution that works for everybody. I'm talking about commitment, and in real terms, I'm talking about long-term grants, I'm talking about bigger grants, I'm talking about endowments, and I'm talking about funders making real commitments to the organizations they support so that we can put the energy and the funding and the resources into long-term, stable programs, you know, well-supported, happy staff that care for themselves, who feel content doing the work that they want to do. I'm talking about a healthy relationship and a partnership.
Thank you. I think another component that we have to think about is how we build collaborative efforts. I truly believe in the power of the collective. I come from a community organizing background where I know that I, as an individual, might be able to accomplish this much. But if I can bring 10 of my closest friends to work towards something, we can make change happen. And I use this as a model for the organization because at the end of the day, unless we're actually connected and actually bringing the voices of those who haven't traditionally been included, we're bound to replicate the same systems of oppression. And so we have some really, really good examples of how we come together as collaborators, as individuals coming together to work towards a goal. But I think one of the biggest ones the biggest success has really been in working with other organizations. Let me tell you, the funders who are in the room, you all have done a great job at dividing and conquering, whether intentional or not. There has been a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of competition because well, who's going to get the credit for that? And so there was one project where we came together to support businesses, and I just started inviting organizations. We're a very small organization. We don't have the resources to duplicate efforts, so let's figure it out. So a lot of our work is at the ecosystem level because we want to create strong ecosystems so that our communities can have what they need. And so we went to one of the organizations. I was like, I talked to the executive director. I was like, would you be willing to partner? And she's like, actually, no. My funders care when I have the credit. And I was like, take it. I don't care. If this is about credit, if it means providing better services, take the credit. And they did. But that's okay, because the moment that we stop caring about the credit and actually care about those individuals who are our constituents, our partners in this effort, if we focus on their needs, something amazing will happen. So in 2020, when the racial uprisings were happening, a lot of faith institutions came to us and they said, you know, I have my Black Lives Matter statement. And we said, that's great. And yet a statement means nothing without action. And so what are going to be your actions? Tell me how you're going to be spending your money. Tell me how you're going to be shifting your spend to ensure that people of color can actually benefit, because your words mean nothing. And so we ended up developing a collaborative, a Co-Purchase Colorado, which is a group of faith-based institutions that have an economic power, to help them shift some of those, to identify where they're spending their money, and then identifying the businesses that could potentially be those contractors. And one of the things that we found was that there were so many people who were interested. They're like, yes, we want to do this, but we're not willing to go the extra mile to identify those businesses. And so at the same time, I kept hearing this, I was like, somebody needs to bring a collective together to develop this. And everybody was like, nope, we got way too much to do. And so at the end of the day, I was like, okay, we're gonna have to do this. So we brought together a group of 12 organizations to come together to co-develop shopbipoc.com. It is now gonna be in the front range, but we're hoping that once the tool is developed, the platform is developed, it can be statewide. And this is gonna be a way for people to search for businesses by industry, by zip code, so that we can make it as easy as possible, removing all of the barriers so that you don't say, well, I wish I could support more businesses, but I don't know where they are. So there won't be an excuse for that. So if you all go shopbipoc.com, and right now there's a coming soon page, you can add your information and then we can send you an email once it goes live. But it is about those collaborative efforts. So it's being branded as shopbipoc.com. This is not about community wealth building. This is not about other entities, because we know that through collective power, we can do so much more than doing it as myself, as Yessica, as community wealth building. There are way too many directories that are already underutilized, are incomplete, and so if we can come together to actually co-create this, we can have something that's gonna work for our communities. But at the end of the day, let's be honest, the other side has a lot of money. And so it is our people that will be our strongest asset, that has been our strongest asset. And so how do we organize our people to make sure that what may seem as unattainable at the moment, something like systems change, can actually happen? And that starts by dividing the issue in a way that makes sense for our communities. Let's have that first win, because that will then encourage us to go for something a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. Amazing things happen when we can feel our own power and when we know that our power is contributing to something much greater than ourselves.
So not to be repetitive, but I think partnerships and collaboration, it's key. If we really want to create the change, it's through those partnerships. Together, we're stronger. You've heard that from all of us. But they are hard. Partnerships are not easy. You have to align around values. You have to align around strategies, around how you share power, how you make decisions together. And as we want to feel in these partnerships that we're respected, understood, and trusted. No different than any other relationships. It's like dating. It is the same. You know, it's how do we build relationships in anything we do in life. And those relationships can exist with funders as well. I think it's really, sometimes we focus so much on the power dynamic, but what you have to fundamentally realize, what you have to understand is as a foundation, I'm only good as the impact I have. And that impact comes from investments in organizations, in nonprofits, and leaders. I need you almost more than you need me. And it's important not to just to default, they have all the power. Again, this is shared. How do we come together around the things that we care about? How do we lift up community, community voice, community expertise, community knowledge? How do we create flexibility in those fundings so that you can do the work that you want to do, that you can show up in this partnership as you are, not fit in an artificial box or some solution that doesn't reflect your community, your culture, your identity. And so that's really, truly what is important. And what I'll also say is we can't forget those individual connections. We can't forget compassion and humanity. It's us that is going to create the change. We are the tools to create the change.
Okay, so the questions are starting to flow in, and I'd like to incorporate one into our next conversation. So it's a question about data. And the question is, so many decisions are based on data or data-driven, right? Can each of you speak about the data process from the design, collection, analysis, and interpretation? And how should that process be changed in order for us to achieve that systemic change that we want to see?
I can take a stab at it. So yes, data has been one of our biggest barriers. When we first started working with these place-based institutions, our anchor institutions, we went up to our universities and said, how much money are you spending with businesses owned by people of color? And they're like, well, we don't track that. How much money is being spent in really anything? They were like, well, we don't really track. We track it, but it's very, very high level. We only track if the businesses are certified. We only track if they've gone through this rigorous and expensive process. We know that our communities are not necessarily going to do that. And so the first thing that we did, the first thing that we've done is we were able to convince a couple of universities to give us their data on basically their credit card data. And then we took that on and ended up analyzing to identify where the lowest hanging fruit was. And as we all know, we spend a lot of money on food. And so we recognize that a lot of these institutions have lunch meetings and student events. And so we saw this as a really good opportunity. And so we were able to connect the universities to the local caterers so that they would once again build that relationship and ensure that they were using, instead of using the very large corporation, that they were actually supporting the businesses in the community. It ended up being a really good event. We actually hosted two of them, one right before the pandemic hit. It was funny to think that our biggest worry in February of 2020 was that there was a big snowstorm coming, and we're like, we're never doing this in February again. Little did we know that the world would be changed in unprecedented ways. But it was truly trying to identify how we start to track those connections. We have heard from our entrepreneurs that they continue to get jobs from the universities, and for some of them, 80% of their business now comes from that connection, from the businesses. Yeah, and it's great, right? It's something so easy. And what was interesting is that a lot of the universities felt like there was a pretty big risk in using a business-owned, local business. What we did is that we worked with the businesses to help them also understand how to work with this large institution, the level of insurance required, the information that they needed to provide, how to do invoicing for tax-exempt organizations. At the same time, we were working with the university to help them understand how to work with businesses in our communities. And so now we're in the process of tracking that through the university side. Earlier, I believe it was last year, our anchor strategy director said, what if we were to track through W-9s? You all require that every year of vendors. And so one of our institutions said, that's a good idea. Let's propose the questions. So we did, and they accepted them. And so now they're tracking data based on the W-9 so that we can have more just additional data as to where that baseline is, because then from there we can start setting those goals and ensure that we're seeing progress. We're seeing progress now, but if we have the numbers to be able to justify it, then we can then go to other entities and convince them, because it's not easy. But, yeah.
Thanks, Yessica.
I'd share something about data too. I think that obsession with data is another thing that sometimes comes from the top but doesn't really relate to the organizations doing the work. This is something that, there you go, yeah. I like it when you say something and it resonates, because it makes you feel like you're not alone in your experience. But in our organization, our communities are rural enclaves, rural communities of immigrants living in Southwest Colorado, a lot of folks from Latin America, a lot of folks who are undocumented. And that's a group of people that we don't have information on. There are people in this country who don't appear in the census, who don't appear in official statistics about population, demographic, age, gender, anything like that. And a lot of the times funders will ask us, well, how many people are there exactly? Tell us what race they are, which is a word I don't like when trying to think about who is a person, what defines them, what are their ages, what are their incomes. And the truth is, that data does not exist for us many times. And the same thing with our outcome data. Many times we in our center, we support people with so many things. There is no clear outcome. There is no clear yes or no. There is no clear accomplishment to measure. And even if we were to measure it, there are privacy concerns for the people we work with who don't want to give their data out and have it floating around in the world. These are people who are being actively persecuted and chased by the government who's trying to remove them. They don't want to give us their information. They don't want that data in any database. We want to respect them for that. And I think a funder who wants to support us and work with us, and I've had this happen before where they say, well, we need more data, and I say, we can't and we're not going to, because that's not what our community wants. And I think that changing that angle of how the funder, how the organization, how we see data as an important tool, but as something that can exist in many kinds of forms. Some of the best data that we have about our programs, our evaluations that we do, it's from random conversations, random interviews, random little chats that we have when we run into our community members at the store or at the gym or at the restaurant. It's conversations, informal, just communication that has so much insight in it. I think what I want to see is funders and those with money, those who are letting us do this work, who are supporting it, understanding that not all of us have the same kind of data, and being able to make accommodations for what we can provide so that we can give them information and tell them what we're doing, but do it in a way that is respectful of what our community wants and the needs that they have.
So building off of what Matt has said, and in my many careers, we understand that. We understand that some of the best information is in stories. And so a huge part of our learning, and we don't really call it so much data, we're about learning. And learning means working with the grantee to figure out what's important to them. What is it that they really want to understand, and what do they want to measure to show impact? And it can look like a lot of different things, and we help the grantees build a learning framework so that we can also shift from, sometimes when I was a nonprofit, I would do this all the time. I would talk about what I did in the process of what I did, and I would get that, so what? And so how do we turn our passion and our process into a story of the impact we're having? And that's not through data and metrics, because a lot of the communities we're working with aren't reflected in our data and metrics. We don't talk about evidence-based, evidence-informed in our practices. We talk about what's community-informed, what works for that community. And community is not homogeneous. It's multiple identities and how people show up, and there's many sizes fits all, so there has to be many different ways that we look at and measure and lift up learning. And we also recognize this is a paradigm shift. You know, when you first tell somebody, hey, don't worry, we're not going to tell you what to measure, they're like, are you kidding me? That's amazing. And then fear comes in. What do you mean? I don't know what to measure. I don't know how to do this. And so we try to surround them both with our staff and other resources to build something that works for them. And then we check in about that and make sure, and if it needs to evolve, it evolves. That's how we learn. That's how we lift up learnings. That's how we show impact. And that's how we change what we're doing to really reflect what community wants and needs.
Thank you all. So the next question is one we had thought about already, and I'm gonna sort of incorporate it with a question from the audience too, and it's specifically about the philanthropic sector, right? The philanthropic sector in and of itself is also part of a very deeply rooted system, and all of you have already started sort of going that way, right? What are some of the key change in rules, shifts in power, mindset, practice, and processes that the philanthropic sector can make, right, to more positively move towards that, changing that status quo and changing its own system. So I'm gonna ask you to come at that question with a practicality in terms of what would be some practical advice that you would give to funders in the room that they could put into practice tomorrow when they go back. Well, tomorrow's Saturday, so maybe Monday when we go back to the office.
Yeah, first of all, don't work on Saturday if you don't have to. We want to get rid of that culture too. But I'll tell you, I think there are very many things that we could change today, both from the funder side and the organizational side. But I think a lot of it comes from the funder side. We have to, as organizations, at the end of the day, we got to have some more money and we got to have some more autonomy on how to spend it. And as a foundation, you can support that. You can trust us. I think that's the biggest word I want to just put out into the universe right now. Trust. You can trust us to do a good job, to do our work, to not impose as many restrictions on us, to not impose as much reporting or tedious application, to trust us in partnership to do what we're doing. I'm talking about big grants rather than small ones where we have to scramble and try to find other funding. I'm talking about multi-year grants rather than just short-term ones so that we can offer people full-time, long-term positions rather than short ones that are going to disappear at any moment's notice. I'm talking about unrestricted grants. Unrestricted grants. Now I know, you funders, you have priorities. You want to work on what you want to work on. And sometimes, in some cases, you do have money that has a restriction from government or state, and that's okay. I understand that, and I respect that. But if you can make general operating grants, it's way better for us. I don't have to make, if I get a general operating grant, I don't have to worry about who's paying for the pencils in the office. I don't have to worry about who's paying for the internet. I don't have to worry about who's paying for my staff, right? It's way more helpful. And I think that it comes from the shift in thinking of programs and overhead to just think it's all the same thing. I mean, it's all the same thing, okay? And if you funders support us more in that way, if you extend more funding to us for longer term with more flexibility on what we can do with it, if you trust us in a committed partnership, then on our side, we can do a lot of stuff to be more effective too. Instead of having a mentality of scarcity, we can have a mentality of abundance. We can pay our staff living wages. How about that? Who here wants a living wage, right? I know I do. We can give people benefits. We can give people health care, retirement. We can give them paternal or maternal parental leave. We can give them flexibility in where to work and when so that we can have caregivers and parents work with us too. But we need you first to give us that flexibility, to give us that trust, and to give us that commitment.
Yes to all of that, definitely, and I won't repeat that, but one of the things that when I started Center for Community Wealth Building, I'll be honest, I was like, I do not want another nonprofit, and yet we couldn't find the right fit for the individual work in communities, the ecosystem level work, and then ultimately the systems change. We were told that we were too radical, that we couldn't push the systems too much because others were at risk of losing funding. Think about that. When our very own money in our communities can be threatened when we challenge the system, there's something wrong with that. So when I then decided that we had to go the C3 route, and I told the board, we don't want to exist in perpetuity. I want to be able to say, here's the community wealth building lens, here's economic justice and how it can work. I want you all to adopt it so we don't have to exist. I don't want to be working in the same issues 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Thank you. What if philanthropy were to think about the same thing? And I understand that some foundations have restrictions, there's perpetuity. And so I'm not talking about the fund itself, But what if we were to actually work for something so that we don't have to exist? And so what if we were to work on systems change so that perhaps we can change our entire monetary system so that philanthropy doesn't need to exist? One of the things that really worries me is that philanthropy continues to perpetuate superiority-inferiority complex. At the end of the day, we can say we have some great funders, we have funders who are still coming along the way, and then we have funding that's still very restricted. What if that were to change? What if we were to actually tax the top 1% so that our communities have everything that they need to survive, so that philanthropy wouldn't be needed to begin with? What if we could actually create the systems so that your endowments are working to support our communities through direct economic opportunity? What if, just basically, what if we were to actually ask in every application, what is the gap between the highest paid employee and the lowest paid employee of the grants that you're giving? So basic. Because I've been part of boards where the executive director is making a lot of money, and yet they still pay those who are actually doing the work minimum wage. That is unacceptable. This philanthropy, this engagement continues to perpetuate that. And we cannot allow it to happen if we actually care about systems change. So I challenge you all to disrupt the status quo. Ask yourselves, how are we spending our own money? Look at the business side and identify if there's ways that you can actually support local businesses in your community. Compensate individuals for their lived experience. Compensate individuals. You wouldn't ask a consultant to do the work for free, right? What if we were to actually treat our community members as valued partners in this journey? Compensate them. You would not believe how many times we've had to educate funders only to say, thank you for the education, and we're not funding you after all. Yeah. And so the extractive practices that we're trying to dismantle continue to be part of our sector. And so I challenge you to think about, how am I using my own privilege to also push others to say, this matters? I applaud the Colorado Health Foundation for adding a goal of local vendors. Because that's exactly how we start to build an economy that works for all. Not through charity, but through actual sustainable development. And so I encourage you to think about the ways in which you can make that happen. Because yeah, we're looking at systems change, but remember that systems change starts with you. And so we need to make sure that when we leave this room, that you have at least one way that you can actually go back and say, this is the one that I'm gonna take on. Because philanthropy cannot continue to operate in the way that we've been operating. Charity is not enough. I want to live in a world where people have enough money to buy whatever they need, instead of having to go to food banks and beg for anything. I want people to have dignified jobs so that they can contribute to their own well-being and the common good.
So what I'll speak from is, as a funder, how do I change, or how do I try to change the sector? What can we do differently and better? And again, agree 100% with what's said, what has been said. And we need to change as a sector, but I'll say that's not us alone. It's in partnership with you as nonprofits. So it is incumbent on you to sort of come to me and say, this is what I need, this is how much I need to pay a living wage. Because I, as a funder, can't tell you what to pay. And I don't want to, because that gets in the way of, that's sort of also what we're trying to disrupt, is funders telling you how to do your work, how to show up as a nonprofit, how to show up as an organization. And so it's through this trust and partnership, we can have this conversation and we can figure out how to get more sustainable. And that was always the worst question as a grantee. How are you gonna be sustainable when this grant funding goes away? My answer was, I'll get another grant. And when that grant ended, you're like, ugh, where am I going to get this funding? And so how we've even turned that on its head is to say, it's not you as the nonprofit or organization that owns sustainability. We own it together. And what does that mean? If all I do is fund you, I'm doing a disservice. I have other tools in my tool belt, which means I show up and support to expand your capacity. I help you have the tools to say, how do I grow my organization in a way that is going to be sustainable? How can I as a funder bring capacity supports around communication, around evaluation and learning, around organizational structure? How am I showing up as your champion? You should not just have to say, like, which is my funder? You should be able to come to me and say, hey, Lorez, I would love an introduction to these 3 funders. And that's what I'll do, and that is what I do, is that it's my job to make sure you are connected to folks that are gonna support your work. So those are one way that funders can show up. The other is putting community at the center. And it's not doing it as a checkbox and saying, hey, we listen to community, that's where we are. But community really, they define what our funding priorities. It's community that told us, we want you to increase access, we want better fit of care, and we want care over time. That's what matters. So that's what drives our work. We also use community members. They're the first ones to look at grant proposals, to tell us what is trusted and what is going to work. So it doesn't matter how the grant is written. It is really about the organization. Are they trusted to do the work? Will they do the work? Are they somebody that they would go to? And then we also use it to change our policies and procedures. So if something we do is too cumbersome, we'll change it. If we're asking everybody else to be a learning organization, we have to be that as well. We have to walk the talk. We have to do the same we ask of any grantee. And that's what I would encourage every funder to do, is really put community at the center of their work. And so even as we fund youth, we have young people sitting at our table telling us, will this work for them? Rather than adults who think we know. And we are trying to do best, but we don't really know what it is to be a young person now. We don't know what's going to work. And so we really have to listen and lift up that community knowledge, that community expertise, and center everything we do around it. And so there's a lot of ways as funders we can change what we do, even so slightly, to better engage, to better support community. I talked a little bit about our learning. Again, we know that it takes more time, so we added learning dollars to all of our grants this year to compensate for that time to build a learning framework. So we recognize we have to bring those resources to better support you, but this is all done in partnership.
We're going to incorporate one more question from the audience. This one's for Matt specifically. And it's a question about the West Side Mobile Home Park that you spoke to. How did you and your organization go about the challenge of changing the status quo in working on that project?
Well, that particular project, I think the credit belongs to the people in that community. The credit belongs to the residents of that park, because it was them who drove the process, who brought the process to our attention. We played a supporting role. I think that's what I would say we did to change the status quo. Instead of leading the thing, instead of saying this is how we're going to do it and this is how it's going to be done and doing it ourselves, we said, let us support you in figuring it out. And our staff who are not here, Beatriz Garcia, Enrique Orozco, both of them were key. All these meetings, all this time with the community members, some of our board members, same. Working with our local government, our county, our city, getting the funding. Our team working with the folks in that park to help them get the resources and the services that they needed to organize themselves. It wasn't us going out and saying, hey, my name is Matt, I work at Compañeros, and let me tell you about this thing that you need to care about. It was more, let's see what let's let you do it. Let me give you everything you need to do this and connect you with the resources you need. And we can help you with our expertise as an organization. We'll help you navigate these services, but ultimately we want you to drive the process. We want you to be the one who's doing it. So we connected with the folks who are in this park with a number of resources. We connected them with some organizations that helped them figure out how to create a legal cooperative. So we help people create, we helped them figure out how to do that, which to me seems like a huge daunting process, but which they did successfully to create a community-owned collective to own this thing. Then we also helped them connect with funders and organizations that were willing to advocate for this cause, spread the word about it, and some that were willing to truly walk the walk and put their money where their mouth was and put down millions of dollars so that this trailer park community could actually buy the place they were living in, which otherwise would have been impossible. Even if they had collectively put all their money together today and tried to buy this, it would be impossible because of the cost. But we got them connected with all the resources we need. We helped them get through the thing, and we let them drive the process and direct it. And I think that's a departure from one way that we see a lot of work being done in the current status quo, which is the organization with the priorities of the funder coming down and saying, this is how we're going to do the thing. I think the way we did it is we said, let me see what I can do for you. How can I help you do this? And we let them drive the process and help them through the whole thing.
Thank you, Matt. Wow, how time flies, right? And what a wonderful conversation it's been. We have 5 minutes left. So rapid fire. Everybody, in your closing thoughts, can you tell us a little bit about what you would, what guidance, what wisdom you would share with our audience in terms of what can each of us as individuals, each one of us, do to change the rules of the game and ultimately change big systems?
All right, rapid fire. The educator in me is going to come out. Not wisdom, but homework. I want you all to go back to your places of employment. I want you to go back to your faith congregations and say, can we do better? Are we actually supporting our communities? Are we actually living our values? For those nonprofits in the room, let's figure out how we challenge the status quo. And part of it can be even more power to the workers, more power through worker-led organizations. Let's figure out how we disrupt the system because it hasn't worked and it will not work. So thank you for being here. Truly appreciate you and the role that you will be playing in actually creating an environment where everyone can thrive.
You know, the theme has been, how do we support one another? How do we work together? How do we together change the status quo? And so what I will offer to you, what I will have you do is challenge us. If ever as a foundation, we aren't living to our values, if we aren't doing all that we should be doing, let's have a conversation. And I am here for any of you if you are trying to figure out how you do that the same with other funders. I am happy to be a sounding board. I am happy to participate because, again, it's us together using our words, using our actions to create the change we want to see.
To all the organizations in the room, to the people who work at the nonprofits who are receiving funding, I would say, speak up. If you want these changes, if you believe in these things, that you want more abundance, you want more flexibility, you want more commitment, trust, and power given to you from your funders, speak up and tell them. Really, this is something that I was really afraid to do when I was first starting as an ED, that I had to learn how to do, because in the beginning, I was afraid. I didn't want to have the little funding that I had taken away. We're now in a bit more of a secure position, and I push back more now. If someone's like, we only have this programmatic thing, I'm like, well, I don't really want that. What else can we do here? How else can we figure this out? If someone's like, well, we're only going to spend it on this, I say, really? Because we don't need that, but we do need this. If you want these things, speak up and realize that you do have a lot of power. And for the foundations and the funders, I would say listen. Really listen to what we're saying as nonprofits. Listen to what we're saying about what we need, about what we want to spend on, about what we want to do, and work with us to find a way to make it work. And I've seen that in this room. Some of the funders in the room, the ones I mentioned at the beginning, I think that they're doing a really good job about this. I think that organizations like the Colorado Health Foundation, like the Rocky Mountain Health Foundation, like the Latino Community Foundation for Colorado, I think there's a lot of organizations that are leading this kind of change. And I would say to you as well, funders, listen to us, but also use your power. You can go out and you can get other funders to think like this. You can show them that it works. The Colorado Health Foundation gave out $15 million endowments to organizations across the state so that they could have a sustainable form of funding forever. That would have been unheard of years ago. But by doing that, you're paving the way for that kind of thing to become more normal. So go out there and use your power.
Thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom, and it is wisdom, thoughts, and just experiences with you. Another round of applause, please, for our panelists.